Okay, this is Module 2, Lecture Video 6 for History 114, History of Springfield. This is Professor Diffley. So we picked up, left off talking about the group dynamics and power relationships. Again, remember I said they were egalitarian. Let's go more. The next one is trade. So they definitely traded with other groups, the evidence is. But when we think of trade, we think of sustained trade, right? Of trade networks, of people trading over great distances. The trade here was most likely of convenience, right? Excuse me, or opportunity. When they run into other groups, they would trade, what do people trade usually? What you have an abundance of and what you need. And it usually goes both ways. And so these groups would probably trade when they found others. They would trade everything from, utility items like flint to make fire, stones to make spears. And we know that they have found stones from the Midwest of the United States in the Northeast, right? How could it have gotten there? Well, there was probably trade, right? It's passed along. Maybe that leads to a greater trade network. But one thing they often find is, just like humans today, hunter-gatherers like shiny things too. That's just, I guess, a human thing. How do we know this? They would trade, really what would be precious or semi-precious stones and things like that for ornamentation, decoration. We see this. Why? Take turquoise. Turquoise is a stone found in the Southwest United States. Very popular in use in Native American and other art there and other jewelry making. It was found all across the East Coast and up in the Northeast. You could trace it back. They can do this. Where did this stone come from? Where did it originate from? It was meant, people traded it. So it's, again, people trade whatever they think is valuable to them. So again, they had trade, not sustained trade, but, more of opportunity. That sort of thing. Where are we next? Technology, innovation. Again, they're Stone Age peoples, as I mentioned. Why? Because they're using stone tools. But increasingly finer and finer stone tools, right? And use of bone too, and things like that. They can make needles from bone, so they could weave, so they could sew, things like that. You've heard this. These types of groups, Native Americans and hunter-gatherers, used every part of the animal, right? You really could. The skin, the hides for clothing, things like that. Leather. You could use the tendons and others to make twine. To make a sort of not twine. For stitching. I'm forgetting the word, but you know what I mean. Things like that. So they were pretty, specialized tools, right? It's not just taking a rock and bashing something, right? They could shape these. And you ever try to break a rock into, try making one of those Clovis spear points. Go out there and find a rock, and I'd be mightily impressed if you could do it. I know I couldn't do it. It probably takes years and years of practice and showing how to do it. But their biggest, innovation was definitely use of fire. Definitely, obviously humans didn't create fire. It's a naturally occurring phenomena. What they did was how to control it, how to start it at will, how to use it then to shape the land, right? And we're going to say this is going to be important when people go into farming, using fire to, slash and burn, right? To, clear large areas. Today you want to clear an area, you have all sorts of heavy equipment, things like that, or you could just burn it, right? And that's what they would do. Fire is also useful. It keeps you warm. Cooks food, unlocks nutrients in the food, helps you see at night, and keeps you safe, right? And so those are the types of things they had. So that was one of their most important innovations. And also the finer tools and more specialized tools that they're making. Did these groups, have a belief in afterlife, early hunter-gatherer groups? Yeah, the belief is they probably did in one way or the other. Was it a religion, true religion as we would call it today? Was it a belief in the afterlife? Yeah. We find humans all around the world creating charms, right? In Europe, you find the Venus of Willendorf. It's a fertility charm. It's a woman. You find it's the same everywhere you go in certain regions that, looks pregnant. Is carved a stone made her look pregnant, something that could fit in your pocket sort of thing. It's thought to be a fertility charm. There's things like that. But it's also, belief in the afterlife and maybe religious practices comes in burials, right? All over the world. And, here too, you'll find people buried, ancient peoples like this buried with items, right? Tools, weapons, food, water, what might pass for money, that sort of thing. Well, it begs the question, why are you giving this all to a dead person, right? If they're in the ground, you put them in the ground, they don't need those things, right? Unless maybe you think they do in the afterlife, right? The way bodies are prepared, certain ritualistic, you'll find bodies painted in certain colors or positioned in certain ways. belief that there must be some belief system behind these, and we see these everywhere. You also find, that's why I talked the Venus figurines. You can see this cave art that is found in Europe. There you can find others all around the world. It's not as well documented. One of the problems is cave art or rock art up in the Northeast is not going to be preserved just by the nature of the climate, right? It's wet. There's a lot of swamplands, lots of rain, snow, and so this has been washed away. But they have found some stone carvings in the Northeast and things like that. But you can find cave art. Why are they doing it? Because it seems to tell a story. Maybe it has a meaning for them, that sort of thing. And like I said, burial practices, stuff like that. Again, this going back, what is the Neolithic Revolution? That's when people change from hunter-gatherers to start farming. Again, what happened is that as the Ice Age ends, it becomes milder in temperature and rainier, right? And so milder means it becomes warmer. Rain, produces more plants, all that sort of thing. We know that happened in Fertile Crescent in that era. It happened because that was further down, from the glaciers. And then in the region we're in the Connecticut Valley, it happened a little bit later. But again, they start domestication of animals, tending, pastoralism. The idea is probably humans domesticated the dog first. It seems to be a symbiotic relationship. Both get something out of it. Evidence they are the most. But, we don't count them as pastoralism because pastoralism is where you're using the animals for food sources, right? Think cows, pigs, chicken, sheep, that sort of thing. And even horses and camels for other uses. That's going to come later. So this is historically what the first animals domesticated: goats, sheep, pigs, cattle, camels, and horses. Now, what's interesting about this, other than wild goats, some mountain goats in some places, none of those other ones existed in the Americas. They did it. Like a great book called A Plague of Sheep. It's about how the central Mexico was changed by Spanish colonists when they brought in sheep and the pigs, and how they destroyed what was the natural habitats. This happens all the time when people. That's why whenever you travel anywhere, they say don't bring back plants or animal life and things like that. Why? Because they can come into a new area and just destroy the ecosystem in many ways. But great book on that, Plague of Sheep, if you ever want to read on that. But look, this is key to the Neolithic Revolution. That's going to matter that the people in the Americas did not have these, right? They don't have the draft animals. They don't have as many sustainable, domesticated plant sources. But when this does happen, people are going to settle in permanent settlements. Going to have more people. Why? Farming needs more hands. Impact, it's going to be good because people are going to have a reliable source of food. It's going to be bad on our health because they're going to be eating the same thing, right? That's usually it. If you're a nomad, you're eating other things. Others, if you're going to have animals closer to you, you're going to get more diseases, right? You take the current pandemic, right? It's thought to come from bats. We know flus, swine flu, bird flu, other things. They jump the species barrier. So when humans are closer to animals, it is easier for diseases to spread and things like that. But so again, now looking at more of the settlement, jumping back. So, we were at the Middle Archaic. We saw a little line here. Now we're at the Late Archaic. And this is the era now as there's food production, there's agriculture, and you can see how the native population is taking off more and more. You get to the middle woodlands and late woodlands. So why does it seem there's nothing in this region? Nobody really knows why they shrunk in size. It's unsure. This does seem to coincide with some changes to weather patterns, climate, so to speak, climate change created by natural phenomena back then, right? Don't think of climate change we talk about today, which the debate is about what is human impact on a change in climate. We know that the climate changes all the time. The argument today is that humans are helping accelerate it. This is back then. What we're talking about, climate change, is that happen, naturally or by disaster. We know volcanoes erupt. They find evidence in the geological record. It creates almost like a nuclear winter. Growing seasons shorten. The sun is blotted out by ash. This does happen. When my parents tell me when there was I forget the volcano in the 80s or 70s that blew up in Washington, but I remember they were saying they're living on Long Island. Days after it happened, everybody coming out one day and all their cars were covered in, everything was covered in a fine layer of ash. And it was the ash that had spewed out of the volcano on the other side of the continent. And so there is historical record of this. So maybe that explains that. there. But then by the time the Europeans are about to get here, you can see the climate seems to have changed, and now you have these settlement patterns up and down the Connecticut River Valley, and it's sort of settled into, and this is where Europeans will encounter Native Americans like this. Again, showing more. Now this is where at this end of it here, right? The woodlands. It's you have ceramic pottery. You have increases in coastal plain, right? You get more and more sophisticated horticulture. And now where you get to here is after AD is the Algonquin peoples, which is where we're getting into with our people. And you can see some more of this in there, different stones. And again, this is from the website that you can see. Here's just a close up of it. So. All right, so this Native Americans in the CT Valley, circa 1400, 1600. Why? In 200 years, we know more about it, the Native Americans in the 200 years prior to European contact, just because it's closer in time, right? The oral traditions, people could be at time of contact, could live up to 100 years, Again, that's one thing when you look back at time, they say, oh, people's lifespans were shorter back then. Yes, they were, but that doesn't mean there weren't people who lived into very old age. Of course they did all the time. It wasn't like you turned 35 and you just dropped dead or something. Why is the, what it skews about the, lifespan? A couple things. One, injuries that would get us that we could easily fix today would kill you back then, right? A tooth infection then could kill you today. I mean, it still could if it goes untreated. A broken bone goes untreated, could kill you from an infection, right? They don't have any way to treat that. You're more likely to die from some of those accidents that you would live from today. The other is infant mortality rates were incredibly high, right? So whenever if babies are dying before age 1, you factor that into when you do an average, you put anything, less than 1 or 0 in there, it's going to drive it down. So, people were older. There. So, Native American cultures and societies, a general overview here. This is about Native Americans and what we know as North America today is what we're going to talk about. So American Indian societies, they're called diverse, populated, and, relative development. And what I mean is they developed based on their region, right? The Native Americans from, was today Arizona, New Mexico are going to be a lot different in their culture, the way of life than they are in the Northeast. And that should be obvious why, just how different the climate is. So one here's the thing though is they didn't think of themselves as one united group, right? As they didn't see themselves as Native Americans. As later the Europeans are going to come over and see them as Indians, right? And later the United States and others will see it that way in official government documents, things like that. They saw themselves as parts of their kin, their clans, and their tribe nations, right? So they did not see themselves as unified. Which is very important, right? They really organized themselves based on their groupings, their nation, same way, many way we do. Native Americans, this goes into the Americas. There were cities, roads, irrigation systems, giant trade networks, empires, political states, all of these things, right? The capital of the Aztecs, the palace of Montezuma was bigger than any of the European capital palaces back in that time, right? The cities were larger than some of the European cities then, right? So they were could be very sophisticated groups there. You didn't find as much of that in the Northeast. They were smaller groups. Definitely still living closer to the land than the giant empires of the Aztec and the Inca and things like that. But they did exist, right? So again, they might have been stoned, but they were very sophisticated in many, many ways, right? So the Europeans are going to depict them as heathens, lacking any culture, civilization, anything like that. That's simply not true, right? There, we'll talk later about why that is. But they did lack advanced technology. There's no metal tools. They had metallurgy here, but it was usually used for decoration and jewelry. They weren't making, they're still using stone tools, but weren't making weapons and tools from it, from steel or from even bronze or anything. Wheels. Here's another thing. They didn't have wheels where the Europeans did. Why? They had draft animals that could pull. Interesting. I put an asterisk there. Native American groups, some of them, Aztec and others, did have wheels. We know we found them on children's toys, like toy cars. It's very strange, but they never put it on a cart that could be pulled, something like that, probably because they didn't have animals to do it. And of course, they don't have gunpowder, right? And that's going to be a problem. That's one of the reasons why the Europeans are so easily able to conquer Native Americans all up and down, all the groups is they had better weapons, technologically superior in that sense, and that is going to lead to that. So again, that's just an overview of it. All right, and we'll pick up here in the next video.